Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're embarking on a truly deep, expositional study, setting the stage for what is honestly a profound journey, from grace to absolute devotion. We're going to be exploring the very heart of God's plan as it's revealed to us in the book of Deuteronomy. If you've ever wanted to understand what it truly means to walk with God, or how to move from past failures into a renewed covenant of obedient love, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get into it. Here is our chronological roadmap for today's study. We'll be walking chapter by chapter through God's divine plan, specifically looking at Deuteronomy chapter 10, chapter 11, chapter 12, and chapter 13. Starting off with Deuteronomy chapter 10, the heart of the covenant. Out of the sheer darkness of human rebellion shines the brilliant, undeniable light of God's mercy. Think about it. After the catastrophic failure with the golden calf, you'd probably expect God to just abandon them, right? But instead, in Deuteronomy 10, 1-5, God commands Moses to chisel out 2 new stone tablets. Now, in the ancient Near East, broken covenant treaties usually meant the absolute end of a relationship. It could even mean death. But here, those broken tablets represent human sin, while the new tablets, they represent God's unending grace. Providing these new tablets proves he is a God of second chances, choosing to renew his divine covenant rather than just walking away. And he doesn't just stop at forgiveness. He actually restores purpose. As we see in Deuteronomy 10:8, God restores the entire order of pure worship by appointing the tribe of Levi to carry the Ark of the Covenant and to stand before the Lord to minister. It's a beautiful reminder that even after profound sin, God never abandons his creation. He actively works to restore our relationship and our worship with him. He literally puts the pieces back together so we can stand in his presence once again. Which, of course, brings us to the ultimate question. God has forgiven them, but what does he want in return? Deuteronomy 10:12 lays it out just perfectly. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. God desires a circumcision of the heart. He is looking for wholehearted devotion. He wants a life motivated by love, not just empty, rigid rituals. It's an invitation to a real relationship, not just a dusty list of rules. Moving on to Deuteronomy chapter 11, the daily walk of faith. Okay, so the covenant is renewed, but how are they actually supposed to live every single day? Deuteronomy 11:10-12 brilliantly illustrates this massive shift in mindset. Consider the contrast here. In Egypt, agriculture relied entirely on back-breaking human effort, irrigating fields by foot, relying 100% on human strength. But the promised land of Canaan, it is totally different. It is sustained entirely by God's providence. It drinks water directly from the rain of heaven, and God's eyes are always on it. Life there depends entirely on relying on God rather than our own human striving. It's a literal daily walk of faith, trusting that God will provide the rain. But that divine provision is tied to a choice. As outlined in Deuteronomy 11:26-28, God sets before them a blessing and a curse. Obedience to God's plan brings that life-giving rain and flourishing, but turning to false gods, that completely shuts the heavens. These blessings and curses are definitely not the result of some blind fate. They are the direct result of our obedience and love for God's divine instructions. True obedience is rooted in constantly remembering God's providence, engraving his word on our hearts, and actively choosing his path every single day. This brings us to Deuteronomy chapter 12, the mandate of worship. So how exactly does a devoted heart practically approach a holy God? Well, Deuteronomy 12 lays out some very strict divine mandates. First up, they must utterly destroy all pagan idols and altars. Absolutely no spiritual compromise allowed. Second, they are to worship only in the specific place the Lord chooses, centralizing their devotion. They're strongly warned not to conform to worldly, pagan religious practices and commanded not to eat the blood of animals, recognizing that life itself belongs to God. And finally, they must not add to or take away from God's word. God is a jealous God, and he demands worship on his terms, not according to our own shifting human desires. Moses actually captures this perfectly in Deuteronomy 12:8, where he warns, "You shall not do according to all that we are doing here today, everyone doing whatever is right in his own eyes." This draws such a sharp, powerful contrast for us. Just think about the spiritual decay of modern individualism today, where everyone kind of just decides their own truth and their own way to worship. God calls us away from that chaos and invites us into the joy and safety of obedient, structured worship under his divine authority. Pure worship is all about submitting our personal preferences to his absolute perfection. And that leads us to our final section, Deuteronomy Chapter 13, the rejection of idolatry. You see, preserving that pure worship requires some fierce protection. It starts with a stark, sobering warning about false prophets in Deuteronomy 13, 1-3. A false prophet is defined right here as anyone who uses signs, wonders, or dreams to lead believers away from God's word to serve other gods. The vital lesson for us here is that divine truth always overrides supernatural miracles. God actually uses these moments to test his people, to see whether our love for him and his word is stronger than our mere fascination with spectacular signs. Our faith absolutely must be anchored in truth, not just spiritual experiences. And honestly, the test gets even harder. Listen to Deuteronomy 13:6. If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, "Let us go and serve other gods," wow. God is stressing the absolute supremacy of his plan here. Our devotion to him must supersede even our deepest, most cherished earthly relationships. If someone you love deeply tries to pull you away from the Creator, your loyalty to God still has to come first. It's an incredibly challenging standard, for sure, but it really shows the absolute exclusivity of our covenant with him. Finally, what happens if an entire community just completely turns away? Deuteronomy 13:12-17 outlines a sobering process of justice for an apostate city, a community that has completely abandoned its faith. First, God commands them to inquire and investigate thoroughly for the truth, so no rush to judgment. Second, if it turns out to be true, they must remove the evil completely to protect the rest of the community from spiritual infection. But third, and I think this is the most beautiful part, it ends with a reliance on God's mercy and compassion for restoration. Even in his most severe discipline, it is ultimately an act of love meant to purify, protect, and finally restore his people. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. What modern idols might be competing with God's rightful place in your own heart today? We might not have literally carved statues sitting in our living rooms, but anything that pulls our wholehearted devotion away from God's plan is an idol. I challenge you to deeply examine your own spiritual walk today. Let's remember those new stone tablets of God's grace and commit ourselves fully to a life of pure devotion and obedient love. Thank you so much for learning with me today.